3 weeks, 3 long weeks of trying to maintain a ranch that needed at least 3 men to run. Wade Thompson dropped another bucket of water by the trough, his shoulders protesting with every movement. His hands were destroyed, covered in blisters that burst open each morning when he grabbed the reins or the rake, but there was no alternative. The last horse handler had been a complete disaster. A drunk named Pitt who nearly burned down the entire stable when he fell asleep smoking among the hay bales. Wade had thrown him out without ceremony. Since then he had posted an ad in the town saloon, the general store, even on the church door. No one responded. No one wanted to work for Wade Thompson. Too harsh, they said in the hallways. Low pay, they murmured in the cantinas. That man is a rock. Impossible to please, the women whispered while buying supplies at the store. Maybe they were right. Wade wasn't an easy man. He had learned not to be. Life on the frontier didn't forgive the soft, the trusting, the dreamers. His father had taught him with iron discipline, and life had confirmed it with betrayals, robberies, and broken promises. Now he had 20 restless horses, a stable falling apart and no help in sight. The sun was at its most brutal when Wade heard something unusual. Absolute silence. The horses, which normally neighed and kicked at this time of day, had suddenly gone quiet. Wade dropped the bucket and walked quickly toward the front fence. His boots kicked up clouds of dust with every hurried step, and then he saw her. A woman was walking down the main road toward his ranch. She wasn't riding a horse, wasn't coming in a wagon or stagecoach, just walking under the merciless sun as if the intense heat didn't exist for her. Wade stopped, squinting against the glare. There was something different in the way she moved. Light, silent, as if her feet barely touched the dusty ground. When she got closer, Wade felt his jaw tense involuntarily. She was Apache. He knew it from everything. The way she wore her long black hair loose over her shoulders, tied only with a strip of braided leather. The buckskin pants mended with meticulous care, the faded cotton shirt that might once have been white, the worn boots that told stories of endless miles traveled. But more than anything, he knew it from her eyes, those night dark eyes that looked at him without asking permission, without apologizing for existing, without looking down. The woman stopped a few meters from him, not close enough to seem aggressive, but not far enough to show fear. "Are you Wade Thompson?" she asked. Her Spanish was perfect, fluent, with an accent Wade couldn't quite place, but that sounded natural. "Who's asking?" he replied, crossing his arms over his chest in a defensive posture. "My name is Saba. I'm here for the job." Wade almost laughed out loud, almost, but something in her expression stopped him cold. There was no pleading on her face, no desperation or humiliation, just a simple, direct statement like someone announcing rain or sunrise. "I'm not hiring women," Wade said, and the words came out harsher than he had intended. "Your ad didn't ask for women," Saba replied without missing a beat. "It asked for someone who knew about horses. I know horses." "Oh, really?" Wade looked her up and down with deep skepticism. "And where exactly did you learn? At some ranch where you cleaned stables and fetched water?" Saba held his gaze without even blinking. There was fire in those eyes, but controlled, like embers burning intensely without producing visible flame. "I learned with my people," she said in a firm voice. "The Apache ride before we learn to walk. We train wild horses without breaking their spirit. We understand them because we live with them, not just on top of them." Wade spat to the side, not out of contempt for her, but because he didn't know what else to do at that moment. This woman was disarming him with every word she spoke, and that irritated him deeply. "My horses don't need songs or mystical rituals," he said harshly. "They need food, water, and someone to clean their stalls. That's all that matters." "Your horses need more than that," Saba said. And now she stepped forward with confidence. "See those three in the East Corral, the black one, the gray one, and the bay with the white spot on its forehead. They're fighting to establish a hierarchy. The black one is the natural leader, but you've been separating him from the others. That makes all of them nervous. That's why they fight constantly." Wade felt a chill run down his spine. She was right, exactly right. He had separated the black stallion because it had bitten 2 horses last week. But since then the others had become increasingly agitated, fighting among themselves, kicking the fences. "Could be simple luck," Wade muttered, though he knew it wasn't. "It's not luck," Saba said with absolute calm. "It's knowledge, observation, understanding, and you desperately need it." Silence stretched between them like a taut rope about to break. Wade could feel the weight of the decision crushing him like a massive stone. If he hired this woman, the whole town would judge him. The other ranchers would mock him to his face. He would lose respect, clients, maybe even friends he'd had for years. But his hands were still bleeding every night. His horses were still restless and difficult. And this strange Apache woman was offering him something no one else in the entire territory had: true understanding, real knowledge. "One day," Wade finally said, his voice sounding more tired than he wanted to admit, "I'm giving you exactly 1 day. If by this time tomorrow I don't see real, tangible results, you leave here without receiving a single cent." "Understood," Saba nodded once. "Perfectly understood. The big stable is over there." Wade pointed toward a building of weathered wood with a half-sunken roof. "In the last compartment at the back is Thunder. He's a wild Mustang I bought 2 months ago from a trader. No one has been able to ride him yet, or even get close without him trying to bite or kick. If you can do something with him, anything, even touch him, maybe we'll have something to talk about after." Saba was already walking before Wade had completely finished the sentence. She didn't run, didn't hesitate for a second, just walked with that same silent, natural grace toward the stable, as if she had spent her whole life heading exactly to that place. Wade watched her disappear into the cool shadow of the building. He took off his dirty hat, ran a hand through his hair soaked in salty sweat, and looked up at the sky, completely clear, without a single cloud. "Dear God," he muttered to himself, "what have I just done?" The wind blew once more from the west, bringing with it the fresh scent of wild sage and something else. Something that smelled like inevitable change, unexpected possibility, certain trouble. Probably all three at once. Wade couldn't help it. After turning his back on Saba and pretending to return to his usual tasks, his feet betrayed him. Instead of walking toward the well as he had planned, he found himself following her at a distance, staying in the shadows like a spy on his own ranch. He felt ridiculous. A 40-year-old man spying on a woman he had just met, but something inside him needed to see what she would do. He needed to confirm that he was making a monumental mistake, that at any moment Saba would come running out of the stable when Thunder tried to bite her face. Then he could tell himself he had been right all along. He approached the side of the stable where there was a large crack between the wooden planks. From there he could see the inside without being seen. The familiar smell of hay, manure, and leather hit him immediately. 20 years working with horses, and that smell never failed to bring back memories of his father, of simpler days. Saba was standing in front of the last compartment. Thunder was inside, and Wade could see him from his position. The Mustang was magnificent, all muscle, and contained fury, with a dark brown coat that shone even in the stable's dim light, but he was completely wild, untamable, dangerous. Pitt had tried to approach once. Thunder had shredded his shirt and nearly ripped off a finger. Since then, Wade himself brought him food, tossing it over the compartment door and fleeing before the horse could attack. But Saba wasn't fleeing. She was completely still. She hadn't opened the compartment door, hadn't reached out her hand, hadn't made any sudden movement. She was just there, standing, watching the horse with an intensity Wade could feel even from his hiding spot. Thunder neighed loudly, an aggressive sound that normally preceded a violent charge. He stomped the ground with his front hooves, kicking up dust. His eyes were bloodshot with what looked like pure rage, but Saba didn't move an inch. Instead, she did something Wade had never seen before. She began to breathe slowly, deeply, so audibly that even Wade could hear her from outside. They weren't normal breaths. They were rhythmic, deliberate, like a slow, constant drum. Thunder snorted again, but this time with less aggression. His ears, which had been pinned back in attack mode, began to move slightly forward, curiosity. Saba took a sideways step, not toward the horse, but parallel to him, then another step and another. She was walking in a circle. Wade frowned, confused. It didn't make sense. What was she doing? But Thunder followed her with his gaze. His muscles were still tense, ready to attack at any moment, but he was no longer stomping the ground, no longer neighing with fury. He just watched. Saba completed the circle and stopped. Then, to Wade's absolute horror, she sat down on the ground. She simply sat, crossed her legs, and closed her eyes. "She's completely crazy," Wade muttered to himself. "She's going to end up dead." But the minutes passed, 5, 10, 15, and nothing happened. Thunder paced restlessly inside his compartment. He snorted occasionally, but he didn't attack. It was as if Saba's motionless presence had confused him, calmed him. Wade didn't know, he only knew that this was the strangest thing he had seen in his entire life. After what seemed like an eternity, Saba slowly opened her eyes. She stood up with the same silent grace with which she had arrived. She took a step toward the compartment door. Thunder immediately backed away, baring his teeth. Saba stopped. She didn't retreat, didn't advance, just waited. Then she slowly extended her hand, not yet touching the door. She held it there, motionless, palm up, a gesture that asked for nothing, only offered presence. "I won't touch you today," Saba said softly, but Wade could hear her perfectly. "Today I just wanted you to know that not all humans come to hurt you. Some just come to understand." Thunder snorted, but this time it sounded different. It wasn't a threat, it was recognition. Saba slowly lowered her hand, turned her back to the horse, something Wade considered absolute madness, and walked toward the stable exit. When she passed the other compartments, each horse stuck its head out to look at her, not with fear, with curiosity. Wade barely had time to hide behind a pile of lumber when Saba came out of the stable. The afternoon sun illuminated her as if she were part of an old painting. She stopped, breathed in the hot air deeply, and then walked directly toward where Wade was hiding. "I know you're there," she said without even looking at him. "It's not good to spy, Mr. Thompson." Wade came out of his hiding place feeling like a child caught stealing candy. "It's my ranch. I can be wherever I want." "Of course," Saba replied with something that might have been amusement in her eyes. "You saw enough. You didn't do anything," Wade said brusquely. "You just sat there like a statue." "That's not taking care of horses." "I did exactly what needed to be done," Saba replied with absolute calm. "Thunder doesn't need to be tamed today. He needs to know he can trust. Trust isn't built in a day, Mr. Thompson. It's built in many small days with many small actions." Wade wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that horses needed a firm hand and discipline, not philosophies and strange breathing. But the words wouldn't come because deep down, in some deep place he didn't want to admit, he knew she was right. I'll come earlier tomorrow, Saba said, interrupting his thoughts. Before dawn, the horses are calmer at that hour. Do you have any problem with that? Wade slowly shook his head. Do what you think is necessary. If in a week I don't see real results, you will, Saba interrupted with unwavering certainty. Trust me, even if just a little. And with that, she turned and began walking back toward town. She didn't ask for food, didn't ask for water, didn't ask for a place to sleep. She just left, leaving Wade alone with his confused thoughts and a strange feeling in his chest, something that dangerously resembled hope. Wade didn't sleep well that night. He tossed in his narrow bed, listening to the wind blowing harder and harder against the wooden walls of his small house. Something in the air felt different. Heavy, electric, as if nature itself were holding its breath before unleashing its fury. He got up before dawn as always and made himself a bitter coffee that burned his throat. Through the kitchen window he could see the sky still dark, but there was something strange about it. The stars had disappeared. Thick black clouds were gathering on the horizon like an invading army. Storm, a big one, Wade cursed under his breath. Storms always made horses nervous, especially the younger ones. And with thunder in the stable, it could be a complete disaster. The wild Mustang could hurt himself banging against the walls, or worse, could break the door and escape. He was putting on his boots when he heard light footsteps on the porch. Before he could move, someone knocked on the door. 3 soft but firm knocks. Wade opened the door and there stood Saba. She wore the same clothes as the day before, but now she had a woolen serape over her shoulders. Her hair was braided back away from her face, and in her eyes was something Wade hadn't seen before, concern. A storm is coming, she said without preamble. A big one. I can feel it in my bones. The horses are going to panic. I know, Wade replied, grabbing his hat. I was just about to go to the stable. We need to prepare quickly, Saba said, already walking toward the stable before Wade could respond. Very quickly. They worked together in an efficient silence that surprised Wade. Saba seemed to know exactly what to do without him telling her anything. She secured the loose doors, moved the hay bales away from the openings where rain could wet them. She checked that each compartment was properly closed. Her movements were precise, economical, without wasting energy. Wade found himself following her rhythm, working faster than he had worked in weeks. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in this impossible task. The first thunder roared as they finished securing the last compartment. It was so strong it shook the stable walls. Immediately, the horses began to neigh in panic. Some kicked at their doors, others ran in circles inside their cramped spaces. And then the rain began. It wasn't normal rain. It was as if someone had dumped an entire ocean over the ranch. The sound was deafening, a constant roar that drowned out everything else. The wind howled like a wounded animal, ripping loose boards and throwing them through the air. The horses in the outer corral, Wade shouted over the noise. We have to bring them in. Saba nodded and ran toward the stable door. Wade followed, and together they went out into the storm. The rain hit them like 1,000 icy needles. The wind nearly knocked them down. Mud formed instantly under their feet, making them slip with every step. In the outer corral, 5 horses ran in circles, completely terrified. Their eyes were white with terror. One of them, a young colt named Lightning, was trying to jump the fence, which could result in a broken leg or worse. I'll get Lightning, Saba shouted. You bring the others. Wade wanted to object. It was too dangerous. The colt was completely out of control, but Saba was already running toward him, moving through the mud as if it were water. Wade had no time to worry. He grabbed a rope and headed for the other 4 horses. He managed to calm the first one, an old horse named Cinnamon who knew his voice. He guided him to the stable through the roaring storm. When he returned for the second, he saw something that left him paralyzed. Saba was standing in front of Lightning, who was still jumping and kicking the air in desperation. But she wasn't trying to grab him with a rope. She was singing. He couldn't hear the words over the storm's roar, but he could see her lips moving. And most incredibly, the colt was beginning to calm down. Slowly, very slowly, Lightning stopped jumping. His hooves returned to the ground. He was still trembling, but he was no longer in blind panic. Saba extended her hand, and to Wade's total amazement, the colt brought his muzzle forward and touched it. A lightning bolt struck so close that Wade felt the impact in his bones. The thunder that followed was like an explosion, but Saba didn't move. She kept her hand on Lightning's muzzle, murmuring words Wade couldn't hear, and slowly, gently, she began to guide him toward the stable. Wade shook his head in disbelief and returned to his task. By the time he had brought in the other 3 horses, Saba had already taken Lightning to an empty compartment and was drying him with an old rag. Both were soaked to the bone. Water dripped from their clothes, forming puddles on the stable floor. Wade was shivering, not knowing if it was from cold or the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. That was, he began, but couldn't find the words. Necessary, Saba finished for him, wringing water from her braid. Horses don't understand storms, they only understand fear. Someone has to show them they're not alone in that fear. Wade looked at her, truly for the first time. Not as a stranger, not as an Apache, not as someone different, just as someone who understood what he had been trying to do alone for so long. You saved that colt, he finally said. If he had jumped that fence, but he didn't, Saba interrupted, because he wasn't alone. The storm continued for hours. Wade and Saba stayed in the stable, moving from compartment to compartment, calming the frightened horses. They worked without much talk, but there was an understanding between them now. A trust born of fire, or in this case of the storm. When the rain finally began to diminish and the sky started to clear, Wade realized something important. He hadn't thought about the color of Saba's skin even once during the whole crisis. He had only thought about how grateful he was not to be alone. "You can stay," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "With the job, I mean, if you still want it." Saba looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to show. "Yes," she said simply, "I still want it." Wade nodded, not trusting his voice to say more. He turned toward the stable door, looking out at the soaked landscape. The sun was beginning to appear between the dispersing clouds, painting everything gold. A new day, a new beginning. Maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be so bad after all. 2 weeks had passed since the storm. 2 weeks in which Wade Thompson's ranch began to transform in ways he had never imagined possible. The horses were calmer, the stables were cleaner. Even Thunder, the wild Mustang no one could touch, now allowed Saba into his compartment and brushed him while murmuring songs in her language. Wade wouldn't admit it out loud, but the ranch had never functioned better, and it was all thanks to her. But the town had noticed the change too, and not everyone was happy. It was Saturday morning when Wade went to town for supplies. He needed flour, coffee, some nails to repair the fences damaged by the storm. Martinez's general store was the only place he could get everything without having to travel 2 days to the nearest city. When he entered, the jingling of the door made several heads turn toward him. Mr. Martinez was behind the counter as always, but there were other men too. Ramirez, the owner of the neighboring ranch, his son Antonio, and 3 more men Wade recognized as workers from nearby ranches. They all stopped talking when they saw him enter. "Good morning," Wade said, taking off his hat politely. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, heavy as lead. "Thompson," Ramirez finally said, a stocky man with a thick mustache and small eyes, "just the man we were talking about." Wade felt his muscles tense automatically. He knew that tone. It was the tone men used before starting trouble. "Oh, really?" he replied calmly, walking toward the counter. "I hope only good things." "That depends on your perspective," Antonio interjected, Ramirez's son, a young man in his 20s with too much confidence and too little brain. "We heard you hired someone new." "That's right," Wade confirmed, keeping his voice neutral. "I needed a horse handler. I found one, end of story." "Not so fast," Ramirez said, stepping closer. "We heard it's a woman, an Apache." The way he said Apache made it sound like a curse. Wade felt rage beginning to boil in his stomach, but he kept it under control. He had learned long ago that losing his temper only made situations worse. "She's an excellent worker," Wade said firmly. "The best horses I've had in years, that's all that matters." "All that matters," Antonio repeated in disbelief. "Father, do you hear this? He has a savage working on his ranch and thinks that's not a problem." "Don't call her that." Wade's voice came out harder than he intended. Silence fell over the store again, but this time it was different, tense, dangerous. "What?" Antonio challenged, stepping forward. "Are you going to defend your pretty Indian?" Wade slowly dropped his hat on the counter. His hands, which had been relaxed, now closed into fists at his sides. He had been patient, had tried to stay calm, but there were limits. "I'm going to say this once," Wade said, his voice low but clear as crystal. "Saba works for me because she's the best at what she does. I don't care where she comes from, what language she speaks, or what people like you think. My horses are happy, my ranch is running, and that's all I need to know." "Your horses aren't the only thing that matters here," Ramirez interjected, his voice now more serious, less mocking. "This community has values, Thompson. We have history. 20 years ago, the Apache attacked farms around here. They killed people, stole cattle. Have you forgotten?" "I haven't forgotten anything," Wade replied. "But Saba isn't responsible for what others did 20 years ago, just like you're not responsible for what your grandfather or great-grandfather did. It's not the same," Antonio spat. "She's one of them. She'll always be one of them." Wade felt something break inside him. It wasn't just rage now, it was disappointment. Disappointment in these people he called neighbors. Disappointment in a town that preached about community and Christian values on Sundays but practiced hatred and prejudice the rest of the week. "Then I suppose we're not so different after all," Wade said quietly. "Because you're one of them. The ones who judge without knowing, who hate out of fear, who never learn that people are more than the labels we put on them." He picked up his hat from the counter and turned to Mr. Martinez, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "I need flour, coffee, and nails. Can you get them for me, or do I need to go elsewhere?" Martinez looked at Ramirez, then back at Wade. For a moment he seemed uncertain, caught between his regular customer and the other men in town. Finally he sighed. "I can get them for you," he said quietly. "Give me 5 minutes." "Thank you," Wade replied. "This isn't over, Thompson," Ramirez warned as Wade waited. "People will talk. Some might stop doing business with you." "Is it really worth it for an Indian?" Wade turned to look him directly in the eyes. "Her name is Saba," he said firmly. "And yes, she's worth it, because for the first time in years my ranch isn't falling apart. For the first time in years I'm not alone trying to do the work of 3 men. For the first time in years I have hope that this might work." He paused, then added, "And if that bothers you, Ramirez, then the problem isn't mine, it's yours." Martinez returned with the packaged supplies. Wade paid in silence, loaded everything in his arms, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he stopped and looked back. "One more thing," he said. "If anyone has a problem with how I run my ranch, they can come tell me to my face. But if anyone tries to hurt Saba or harm her in any way, they'll have to answer to me first. Is that clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. He left the store, mounted his horse, and rode back to the ranch with his heart still beating hard in his chest. When he arrived, he found Saba working with the horses as always. She looked up when he dismounted, and something in her expression told him she knew exactly what had happened in town. "Trouble?" she asked simply. Wade shook his head as he unloaded the supplies. "Nothing I can't handle." Saba studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Wade asked, genuinely confused. "For standing up," she replied, when it would have been easier to sit down. Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and went to put away the supplies. But as he walked, he felt something warm in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not of himself necessarily, but of having done the right thing even when it was difficult. 3 months had passed since that tense day at Martinez's store. 3 months in which Wade had expected trouble that never came in the way he imagined. There were no direct threats, no violence, but there was something worse: silence. The other ranchers stopped greeting him when he went to town. Some customers who used to buy horses from him stopped coming. At church gatherings, people sat far away from him. It was as if he had contracted an invisible disease that everyone feared catching. But Wade discovered something surprising. He didn't care as much as he thought he would, because his ranch was thriving. The horses under Saba's care were not just healthy, they were magnificent. They shone with vitality, behaved better. And news began to spread, not among the local ranchers who avoided him, but farther away. Traders from other towns, riders who traveled long distances. Everyone wanted to see the famous horses of Thompson Ranch, and everyone wanted to meet the Apache woman who had a nearly magical gift with them. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the visitors arrived who would change everything. Wade was repairing a section of fence when he heard the sound of several horses approaching on the main road. He looked up and saw 5 riders. One of them wore a uniform Wade recognized immediately. The Army. His heart sank. The Army and the Apache had a bloody history in this region. They had come for Saba. He stood quickly, wiping his hands on his pants as the riders approached. The one in uniform was a man of about 50 with gray hair and a scar that crossed his left cheek. The other 4 appeared to be assistants or escorts. "Mr. Thompson?" asked the man in uniform, dismounting with the elegance of someone who had spent his whole life on horseback. "The same," Wade replied cautiously. "How can I help you?" "My name is Colonel Mendoza," the man said, extending his hand. "I come from Fort Benton. I've heard interesting things about your ranch and about a woman who works here, an Apache woman named Saba." Wade felt all his muscles tense, ready to defend Saba if necessary, but something in the colonel's expression wasn't hostile, it was curious. "Saba works here," Wade said firmly. "She's my employee and an excellent worker." "I didn't come to cause trouble, Mr. Thompson," Mendoza said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Quite the opposite, I came to do business." Before Wade could respond, Saba appeared from the stable. She stopped when she saw the uniformed men, and for the first time since Wade had known her, he saw something like fear cross her face. But it was only an instant, then her expression returned to calm and neutral. "Saba," Wade called, "these men come from Fort Benton. They say they want to do business." Saba approached slowly, keeping a prudent distance from the soldiers. Mendoza took off his hat respectfully. "Miss Saba," he said with genuine courtesy. "I've heard remarkable stories about your work with horses, stories that, I must admit, I thought were exaggerations until I spoke with people who have seen them with their own eyes." "What do you want?" Saba asked directly, without preamble. Mendoza smiled slightly as if appreciating her frankness. "The Army needs horse trainers, good trainers. Our horses are nervous, difficult to handle in combat. We lose more soldiers to frightened horses than to enemy bullets. I've tried a dozen different trainers and none have worked." He paused, then continued. "But I heard you have a different method, a method that respects the animal instead of just breaking its spirit, and that's exactly what I need." Wade looked at Saba, trying to read her expression. She stared fixedly at the colonel with those dark, indecipherable eyes. "Are you offering me a job?" she asked slowly. "I'm offering you a contract," Mendoza corrected. 3 months to train our horses at Fort Benton. The payment would be generous, very generous, enough for you to buy your own land afterward if you wanted. The silence that followed was dense. Wade felt something strange twisting in his stomach. It was an incredible opportunity for Saba, an opportunity for security, for respect, for a future, but it also meant she would leave. And the idea of running the ranch alone again after experiencing what it was like to have real help filled him with a sadness he hadn't expected. "I can't," Saba finally said, her voice firm. Mendoza blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry, I can't accept your offer," Saba repeated. "I have a commitment here. Mr. Thompson gave me a job when no one else would. He gave me an opportunity when the whole world turned its back on me. I won't abandon him now." Wade felt something warm expand in his chest. It wasn't just words, it was loyalty, it was honor, it was something he had thought no longer existed in the world. Saba, Wade said softly. It's a good opportunity. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted, looking directly at him. You stood up for me when it was hard, now I stand up for you. Mendoza looked at them both with a thoughtful expression, then smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his severe face. I see, he said slowly. Then allow me to make a different offer. How about I hire both of you? Mr. Thompson, I've heard you're also an excellent horse breeder. 3-month contract for both of you, training and breeding, double the pay. Wade and Saba looked at each other. In her eyes, Wade saw a question that needed no words. Do we do this together? Wade slowly nodded. We would need guarantees, Wade said, turning his attention back to Mendoza. Guarantees that Saba will be treated with respect, no discrimination, no problems because of her heritage, Mendoza finished. I understand, Mr. Thompson, and you have my word as an officer. Anyone who disrespects Miss Saba will answer to me personally. Wade extended his hand. Then we have a deal. Mendoza shook it firmly, then turned to Saba and offered his hand as well. After a moment of hesitation, she accepted. Excellent, Mendoza said with satisfaction. Come for you in a week. That gives you time to prepare the ranch. After the soldiers left, Wade and Saba stood in the dust of the road, watching them disappear into the distance. This is big, Wade finally said. Yes, Saba agreed. It's a little frightening. Frightening? Wade looked at her, surprised. I thought you weren't afraid of anything. Saba smiled slightly, the first real smile Wade had ever seen from her. Everyone is afraid, Mr. Thompson. The difference is, what do we do with that fear? Do we let it win, or do we use it to make ourselves stronger? Wade nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in those words. You know, he said after a moment, I think when we return from Fort Benton, we should make this official. Partners, 50-50 on the ranch. Saba looked at him with bright eyes. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The sun began to descend on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Wade and Saba walked together back to the stable, no longer as employer and employee, but as partners, as friends, as two people who had found something rare in this harsh world. Mutual trust. The future was uncertain. It always was. But for the first time in years, Wade Thompson faced it with hope instead of fear, and that made all the difference.